Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Good morning, good morning. My name is Andrea Simintov, and you are listening to Pull Up a Chair on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Oh boy, I wish that I could tell you what it's looking like outside my Jerusalem window, but I can't, because I am still sitting in Long Beach, Long Island, and I'm actually looking out over the Atlantic toward my beloved Jerusalem, toward my beloved country. And I'm very happy that you are up this late with me, or indeed up so early, listening to this special show, this special edition, acknowledging, commemorating Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and Yom HaZikaron, which is coming up next week, the Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terror. Before we go on, I do want to say hi to everybody who's listening in the U.S. Boker Tov, Eretz Israel. Hi to Australia. Boy, is it late there. France is listening in. The Russian Federation is with us this morning, and we also have listeners from the Ukraine, Nigeria, and the Virgin Islands. Thank you for being with us. Again, it's a strange show. We're usually so funny, so lighthearted, always looking at the joyful side of life. But the week coming up ahead is what I have always called the most sacred week on the secular Israeli calendar. And a lot of thoughts to share together. The chat room is open. Send me your notes. Tell me you're listening in. Tell me from where you're listening, and we will share these thoughts. I want to thank my friend Janice for helping prepare this show tonight. I don't have my regular studio set up. I don't have my regular printing machines, and she was able to help me so much. Okay, today we're going to talk about really the remnants of those who withstood the Nazi war machine. They're still with us. A handful of them are left. And when we come back, we're going to talk particularly about what the Holocaust means to us today. See you on the other side.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
And we're back. Andrea Simintov, Pull Up a Chair on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. You know, be careful, everybody. Be careful, boys and girls. Be careful of the pledges we make and the things we say. Several years ago, I was in South Africa visiting my children exactly during this week, this very powerful week, and it was so difficult. It really is like living without a limb to be outside of Israel during this most poignant, powerful, uniting time. It's that time of year in Israel where we forget our differences, we forget our anger, we forget that we're going to probably have a 5th, 6th, and 9th election, and we're together. That common thread that ties us, that makes us remember why we are part of the Zionist state. It's the most glorious time of year. It's a time where you forget the bills, you forget how difficult, you forget the language that you do not have, and you know why you're there. And it feels just that much more special. And I said I would never be outside of Israel again during this time of year. And guess what? I did it. My excuse is holy. Indeed, I'm here to visit with my very elderly mother, but I'm feeling the absence. I'm feeling the separation. So when I say to you that today's show is what I call the two-part whammy, it's a two-part whammy because this is the week. Last night in Israel, the sirens, well, I know that not the sirens, but the ceremonies began commemorating the most horrible event in modern Jewish history, a word that used to make us shake and quake and almost become sick with horror. The word was Holocaust. Oh, what that word would do to people. But of course, today we've overused it. We've made too many movies that have been serious, movies that have been frightening, but we've also had laughter with it. We've made Springtime for Hitler. We've talked about Hogan's Heroes living in the, what were they, in a stalag. Yuck, yuck. We've made it anemic. And I've heard from people, oh, we've all heard. Get over it. It's over. It's finished. Look forward. Yeah, indeed, the Shoah, the Holocaust is for so many. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. It's a little too Jewy. Isn't it enough to say never again and hope we're never, ever put to the test? The never again, which makes me wince in embarrassment. You know, you get that little ping behind your eyes when it's just a little too nerdy. It's embarrassing because the only way that never again happens is for us to remember to keep it front and center and know what can happen when reasonable men go mad with their own senses of self-importance. I want to share a story. It's actually two stories I want to share. I'm back at this time. At this time, I'm actually doing this show from my childhood home, which is empty. There's no furniture left. There's an old coffee pot, some corningware. Sleeping in my father's bed, the bed of my late father, but the room is stripped. And I'm here, and I'm remembering so much of my childhood. I want to tell you that when I was a little girl, I remember I was born in 1955. So let's say 1967, a girl in my class was having a bat mitzvah. A bat mitzvah, we all had bat mitzvahs. I had a band, I had a little trio playing at mine. We had photographers, we were singing rock and roll. And this girl, I'll call her Susie, it's not her name. Her bat mitzvah was held in her backyard. Her relatives, there were a bunch of old, quiet, morose relatives. The rest of us had bat mitzvahs that were cool, that were with it. I think we sang Beatles songs. And Susie's bat mitzvah, there were all these relatives. I remember one in particular. One leg was shorter than the other, a woman. She was very attractive, and she had one of those shoes that were built up. It was so scary. And Susie's mother and father never smiled. They spoke in strange accents. And she was an overachiever. But at the end of the day, her parents had lived through the most ghastly event imaginable, and she was indeed a child of the Holocaust, born to these people. Only later did I learn that her mother and father had been married to other people, and they both had lost children buried. And Susie and her brother Robert were the first children born. I didn't go back to that house. It wasn't fun. It was a drag. All those strange sounding relatives with numbers on their arms. Mm-mm-mm. Not for me, not for American me. And then I'll remember another time, years later, oh, perhaps a decade. And at the time, I was engaged to a young man, a wonderful young man, whose mother was alive and she was a survivor. I remember sleeping over his childhood house. It was a family event, and he had gone to school or to the hospital where he worked. And I was left in that house getting ready late, and I was walking down the stairs, tiptoeing, not to wake anyone. And suddenly I peeked into his bedroom where he had spent the night. And he had left maybe 3-4 hours earlier. And I saw his mother. She was lying on top of his already made bed, and her arms were holding the sides. She was lying on her back, and she was holding the sides of the bed as if she could not believe the son that she had created that slept in that bed. I laughed at that. I mocked it. I came home. I said, wow, you'll never guess what weirdness I saw. Only later did I realize that I had chanced upon something that was holy. It was a picture of resilience. It was a picture of faith. It was a picture of someone shocked at the reward for the prices she had paid. If only I had understood. The shame was mine. The advent of Yom HaShoah, as it was coming, made me think to myself, how can I talk about this? I don't have any first-degree relatives. Yes, I live in Israel, a country that in many ways came alive, breathed new breaths upon the remnants, the ashes that came out of the ovens of Europe. It's not just the fact that the Holocaust destroyed 6 million innocent co-religionists of ours. You know what? We're the embodiment of tragedy. We know all about it. But it was the idea that each year we still can't find a place for it in our souls that gives us closure, that gives us a greater meaning, that we could share with one another and say, aha, we've got it. Oh, more museums. Yad Vashem is magnificent. It does an incredible job. But you know, you don't walk out comforted. You don't walk out thinking, I've got a grip on this. I get it now. Jews have souls. A museum can speak to our senses. It can speak to our intelligence. It can even speak to our emotions and our heart. But you know what? A museum cannot touch the soul. You know, there are a lot of groups within Jewish society today that really don't do they don't do Holocaust. It's, again, as I said, it's uncomfortable. It's over. It's too Jewy. There are a lot of reasons, but you know what? What is so sad, we're just coming out of Passover, and we know we remembered the 4 sons. But the son that hurts the most is that 5th son, the son who's not at the table. We can remember the Holocaust each year. We can try to make the ceremonies even more meaningful, even as the numbers dwindle. But regardless of how meaningful the ceremonies are, if Jews are absent, we're missing the point. You know, those of us who are alive today still wear the tefillin, the cloak the embodiment of God's want for all of us in our very existence. Being Jewish can speak to our souls, but to help us truly commemorate the Holocaust and to commemorate our resilience, we have to not say never again, but indeed, even if we just get together and in our collective memory sigh, we will give meaning to where memory once lived.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Okay, we're back. Andrea Simintov, pull up a chair. You see, talking about serious topics, but still I have to laugh. I have a couple of questions for you. Is there any reason why, let's see, what month are we? We're in April. I'm in this apartment. They have heat coming up the heaters. It's so hot in this place. What is with, why do Americans need so much heat? Maybe it's not an American thing. Maybe it's an old person building thing. That's number one. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you, just on a kind of humorous note, I was in, tonight I had dinner with some friends in the 5 Towns of Long Island, a lovely restaurant. It was really nice. I'm not giving them a plug because I didn't, I don't know, they didn't give me any bonuses at dinner or anything. But anyway, there was a detour on the way home with flashing lights. I couldn't believe this terrible detour. I thought, oh my gosh, I hope nobody was hurt. I saw fire trucks like sitting idle. And I couldn't really see. I don't drive that well at night. I actually don't drive that well during the day, but at night I'm particularly terrible. And I get into this long line. There's nowhere to go. And suddenly I see people in front of me. Again, it's not a science fiction film. I'm driving home and I'm in this slow-moving queue. This detour, according to Waze, is going to get me back to where I'm going. And cars are slowing down and they're popping open their trunks. The trunks of their car, the boots, for my friends in England. So I don't know what to do. So I pop open my boot. I figure, I don't know, maybe it's some kind of a police check. Maybe they want to see if I'm carrying around, vials of COVID that I'm going to spread along I don't know what they're doing. And I'm driving. And finally, the car is slowing down. And 2 young women wearing like neon vests come running over to my car. And they start to put cartons into my trunk. And I said, wait, stop. What is this? What is this line? And they say, it's a food drive. Food for the needy. They started to put, I said, no, get the food out of my trunk. I don't know what I'm doing in this line. There was nowhere to go. Anyway, can you imagine? I got held up in a food drive line. And all I thought was, I let them take the food, let them give it to other people. But I thought to myself, oh my gosh, God, look at your holy people. Look at your beautiful children. It was even worth the detour in traffic. I'm telling you, there was nowhere to go but onto the food drive. Anybody else that thinks this is strange? It was like a scene out of Twilight Zone. Okay, we're back. The last thing I'm going to say, because again, in terms of Yom HaShoah, to be outside of Israel is indeed, for someone like me, it's a travesty. I do want to say one thing. This last year, about a year and a half ago, I had the great honor of being with my daughter like 7 minutes after she gave birth in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. Shaarei Tzedek, the gates of righteousness. Anyway, I was with her, and it was a new maternity ward. And what was amazing was, I think it's the 8th floor. You go into the elevator, you press the 8th floor, and everybody knows where you're going in the elevator. And they all say, Mazal Tov to you, or B'Sha'a Tova. It should be a good birth at a precipitous, at a good time. Anyway, what I didn't realize at the time, and I later learned, was that the entire maternity, the new maternity ward at Shaarei Tzedek Hospital overlooks Yad Vashem Museum. They have tens of thousands of babies are born there every year. And it was built directly as a message to those who made Yad Vashem not possible, but the ugliness in our history. It's a direct response to those who would annihilate us. This is what we do. We will repopulate. We will bring more holiness into the world. I just thought it was lovely. All right. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Israeli calendar, we have two major memorial days. Yom HaZikaron is the Remembrance Day for fallen soldiers of Israel, and currently it was put together with Israeli terror victims. Unfortunately, we don't have a shortage of either. And Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust and Heroism Memorial Day. One is a reminder of the cost of having a Jewish state, and the other is a reminder of the cost of not having one. Now, if you have ever spent Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron in Israel, you know just how special it is. It's a very different experience from the American Memorial Day that has become, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in many ways an opportunity to catch bargain in retail sales. That isn't that there aren't many American families who they themselves remember a fallen loved one. But no other Memorial Day in the world feels quite like Yom HaZikaron. The music on the radio, it's heavy, it's downbeat, it's pensive. The television broadcasts, throughout the day, they name more than 23,000 names. It's in a loop. You can see it going all day long. Movie houses, well, even if it weren't the year of COVID, movie houses, restaurants that closed. Everybody in Israel has a friend or a family member who died in a war or attack. A friend of mine tonight at dinner reminded me, I didn't know, I couldn't remember. She reminded me of being in my house once, years ago. I had just made Aliyah, and she heard a scream. It was a scream of a woman, a mom, opening the door and seeing the military officials there, including a rabbi, including a doctor and a nurse. And when you open up the door, that door in Israel, and you have a child in the army, you know what that visit means. And she had heard that scream. And I was able to tell her what it was. We don't have a national memorial for the fallen here in Israel. So many are buried in the Har Herzl cemetery. But you know, every city in Israel has a Yad Labanim, a memorial to our children that honors the fallen. There are many unique features, but I tell you, perhaps the most unique feature of Yom HaZikaron is the siren. It is a siren that sounds all across the country promptly at 11 a.m. Israel time. At that time, the entire country comes to a halt. I don't want to get off topic, but I do encourage you to go onto YouTube and type in Memorial Day Siren Israel. It is an image that will stay in your mind forever, to see cars stopping on highways, thoroughfares, to see the trains in the middle of town stopping and people getting off to stand in complete respect for those who paid the ultimate price. You know, I came across a lovely analysis of the siren, and the writer expressed something that stopped me in my tracks. He said that the siren was very powerful. The siren was meaningful. And the tradition is something that I pray will be as weighty as it is forever. But what was so impressive to him, and I loved it, is not the stopping, but indeed the resuming. That after the siren, people resume the normalcy of their lives. Shoppers, they go back to buying groceries. Drivers get back into their cars and they enter new traffic jams. Employees, they go back to work. Maybe thieves go back to stealing and policemen go back to catching them. But Jews leading normal lives in our homeland, that is the understated, but perhaps should be the overstated miracle of Israel. It is the best monument to what we have and what we merit from that sacrifice today. You know, most of us have no memories of a time when Israel didn't exist. Can't imagine anybody in this audience. Anybody here born before 48? Would be interesting, nice. So it's only natural that we take Israel as a given. It's part of our new normal. That siren, it reminds us that being normal, that being ordinary in the land of the Jews is a miracle that came with defiance, it came with blood, and it came with unprecedented heroism. Indeed, it was bought through terrible, terrible pain. At the age of 73, we're not perfect, but it's ours. It's a glorious, glorious work in progress. It doesn't end. There's a lot to do and a lot to go on. We're complex, but everyone, let's just take a breath. Let's count our blessings. Let's take a moment to feel gratitude for those who made that blessing possible. And we have to honor them by being as normal and grateful for what they bequeathed us. Andrea Simintov, I'll see you on the other side.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Ben-Tekoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
Okay, Andrea Simintov, we're back. Do you believe this is the last segment of today's show? Huh. Okay. It's just racing and racing when you're having a yuck good time. All right. So, again, today is what I call the double whammy show. It's a show that's very critical, very important, not business as usual. And even though we love to laugh, to celebrate, to poke fun at our enemies, these are days of reflection, little introspection, and levity untethered is foolishness, but levity with I'm making this stuff up, of course, but there's a time to be serious. And this indeed is that time because, Jewish tradition has developed this kind of a system of memory and remembrance for its martyrs and heroes. It's an understated system and it doesn't require speeches. That's one of the most interesting parts. I mean, because everybody is in charge of their own attitude, their own approach to the events around them and the events that resulted in the creation of the modern Jewish state. We emphasize with our approach to martyrdom and heroics the frugality of life, how delicate it is, how uncertain, and how security really is not a given. We tend to highlight the interdependence of Jews one upon another. I tried to express this earlier in the program. It doesn't unduly glorify the art of war. We do not believe in jihad. We do not believe that the rewards of heaven by snuffing out our lives. We do not celebrate suicide. We don't indeed glorify that, but we don't shirk from realizing the effects of heroism and martyrdom on Jewish history. We remember people, we admire sacrifice, and ultimately we cherish life. Our time allows, for the first time in millennia, the ability to defend ourselves against vicious enemies. It was very rare instances where Jews were anything but defenseless martyrs. Jews had no choice but to have a kind of muted Memorial Day and service. But today it's different. Today we have our own courageous, our own successful army, and that gives us an ability to defend ourselves from our enemy. The day of remembrance for our fallen soldiers is much more serious. It's more somber, and perhaps it's even more meaningful. In Israel, you don't really see military parades. We return to a more traditional way of marking these special days. If I could put it into one concise thought, I'd have to share with you that we in Israel, we're a country of relatives. We're mishpacha. We are a land of there, but for the grace of God go I. Indeed, if one family is mourning, we are all brokenhearted. In personal and private life as well, days of remembrance have a special meaning. In the Jewish tradition, they even have special rituals and ceremonies. Yortzites, which are memorials and days of zikaron, memory, they're commemorated with a memorial candle. We recite the Kaddish, the granting of charity for the needy. We share words of Torah and faith, and we reminisce over those who left this world. In a strange way, our days of remembrance are really meant to be days of closure and even comfort, and not one of scraping open old and painful wounds and memories. There's no hiding from loss when we lose a beloved one. But the Torah demands that we progress and raise ourselves even from personal tragedy and sadness. The way it's set up when we experience personal loss. We have a week of Shiva. We have a month of other mourning practices. Then we have a year of other practices. And then it becomes a yearly acknowledgement, a yortzeit. Memory is meant to encourage positive action and meaningful behavior in life. Remembrance, my friends, is very serious business. And so are the days of memory and tradition. I don't know about you, but I treasure and respect these opportunities. Deep breath. Okay. There's always Torah. There's always Torah. Torah, our blueprint, our life plan, our spine, our backbone, our oxygen. This week's Torah portion is called Shemini. Funny, because we're talking about these heavy-duty topics, and there's a lot of heavy-duty topics here in Shemini, but one of the things I do want to tell you is that I want to share with you the story of kashrut, keeping kosher. I went to a kosher restaurant tonight because that's the kind. Actually, this was the first time I had been to a restaurant in a year, since the year of COVID. The Rambam points out that Jews were spared certain plagues in the Middle Ages because of our restricted diet. Again, listen carefully. It's not the reason we observe we eat kosher so that we won't get, salmonella poisoning or botulism. But it was just interesting as a side effect of that special diet, the Rambam believed that we were spared. Now, others pointed out that the laws were kind of created in such a fashion that no compromise with its statutes could be tolerated. If two requirements, we say that a kosher animal must have split hoof. Okay, imagine, the hoof of a horse could not be kosher because it's an entire foot, but it has to have a split hoof, and they have to chew their cud in that kind of roundabout way. Imagine a cow. There's a widely known story about the pig who extends his cleft hoof and says, look, I'm kosher. So the Abarbanel maintains that the laws of kashrut are intended as not to beat botulism, but instead they're spiritual food for the soul. And therefore, the kosher food is needed to keep us pure. And he's also agreed with by Rabbi Hirsch, who says, just as the external temple, which represents your holy mission and to which you should sanctify yourself, becomes desecrated by impurity, tumah, so are there foods that are impure and unfit for the temple, which you yourself are. Your body, your heart, your spirit, all of them are living places of activity for your own being, which is called upon to be holy. Whatever the actual reasons, all agree that the dietary laws are part of a process. The process involved in making the Jewish nation what we call a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. It's our duty to be a nation of priests for the rest of the world. And just as we are the priests to the world of nations, we also have priests who have to adhere to additional laws. Priests are imbued with duties, rights, responsibilities, which make them priests of a priestly nation. We too are priests of our own selves, our own nation. So I'm saying, let's keep it holy. Rabbi Menachem Mendel, I came across this, I loved it, I needed to share it. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk comments, an earthenware vessel can become unclean only on the inside, never on the outside, because an earthenware vessel actually has no value in itself. The sole worth lies in the fact that it can serve as a receptacle for an object of value. Metal utensils, on the other hand, they have a value in themselves and can therefore become unclean on the outside also. Man, because we're made of dust, is like an earthenware vessel. His worth lies not in the outer shell, but in the human qualities within. The history of the Jewish people, just as is true of the lives of individuals, there are many instances of tragedy and disappointment, but the overall impression that Jewish history should leave on those who study it is the great resilience that our story represents. Our story is one of tragedy and triumph, and always light, always brightness at the end of a dark, dark corridor. This last century has been very tragic, has been very terrible for the Jewish people. But if anything, our existence proves that this time of great resilience and untold accomplishment has resulted in something that we can only begin to imagine. We should always remember that no matter what our situation might be today, we as Jews will always attempt to live and be successful on the day after, when we're told to rise and begin again. My name is Andrea Simantov, and I wish you Shabbat Shalom.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.